What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks for being here today. Hope your Sunday's going well. The big news on Saturday, of course, is that Aaron Rodgers is going to be traded to the Las Vegas Raiders. Of course, that is if you listen to all the random whispers and things that are completely unverified and everything else. Sam Barrington, former Packer, is apparently weighing in on this. Devontae Adams is liking stuff. Aaron Rodgers is talking about it at the golf course. It all means nothing at this point. And if you are hoping that Aaron Rodgers ends up in Las Vegas by all means, go ahead and like all those tweets and enjoy the conjecture. This is what this part of the season is for, is fun and conjecture and who's going to end up where. I have no idea. I have no idea what any of it means. And until we get some sort of definitive answer, my guess is that this is still in the stages of Aaron has to decide if he's going to return or not. And then once he decides to do that, he's going to have a conversation with the Packers, and the Packers and he are going to hash out if he's actually going to be a Green Bay Packer or if he's going to go to another team. If they decide he's going to go to another team, my guess is they're going to have some bidders that are involved in this, whether it be the Jets or the Raiders or who knows who ultimately ends up getting involved. But I don't have much else to say on it other than it's just, this is silly season, right? Like, we're going to get a ton of unverified rumors and sources and everything else. And this is just going to be as the Rodgers turns for the foreseeable future until we actually get a conclusion to the 2023 Aaron Rodgers saga. So no real news, no real update, just some random stuff that happens only on social media and will probably remain there and never actually be anything that comes to fruition. But who the heck knows at this point? Anywho, let's get to our main topic, and that today is going to be the state of the NFC North, because we're coming off an interesting season where the Packers finished third in the NFC North, an extremely disappointing season. I know going into the year, I thought that they were the easy favorites to be the winners of the NFC North, potentially competing for a championship. I will readily admit I was wrong. It happens. It'll happen again. It won't be the first time, won't be the last time. But they have a disappointing season, and Minnesota has a very nice regular season, but you could sort of see the underlying issues with that team all throughout the year, including when Green Bay absolutely crushed them in the, penultimate game of the season, and then they go on and lose in the first round of the playoffs, and the rest was history for them. The Detroit Lions end up second in the division. They go 9-8, have a really nice season. In total honesty, I wish they could have been the team that got in instead of the Seahawks. Probably still lose to the 49ers, but that would have been more entertaining to me as seeing the Lions play and see what they could have done in a playoff scenario. And then you have the Bears, who finish as the worst team in the NFL at 3-14, which if you're a Packer fan isn't actually ideal because you can talk a little bit of smack like, hey, you finished as the worst team, worse than the Texans. But the Packers finished 8-9 and they actually got the first pick in the draft and neither team made the playoffs. So it's really tough to talk smack in that situation, even though, the Bears were the worst team in the NFL. And there is, I guess, a little bit of something to that. But at the end of the day, it just gets them the first pick in the draft, which we're going to certainly talk about. So what I wanted to weigh out today is where are each of these teams in their progressions as a franchise? They're all in very different spots. You've got a Green Bay Packer team that's on the decline and really in this sort of flux question mark phase where what's going to happen next? Is Aaron going to be back? Are they going to go all in again? Are they going to try to win? Probably more of some sort of reboot with either Love or Rodgers at quarterback. TBD remains to be seen with some of these guys back, but probably not going in an all-in situation. Or do they go with more of an aggressive rebuild? You've got Minnesota, who's in a, like I said, won the North, had a really great record, 13-4, but first round exit, and they don't really have a great young core outside of a couple players, which again, we'll discuss in a moment. The Lions seem to be on the ascend, but you've got just how far can Jared Goff take you at quarterback? And then you've got the Bears, who are basically a complete blank slate at this point and are going to get to basically build this team from scratch. So that's where we're at. So let's look at this NFC North from a variety of different ways in a holistic view, from current roster to core of the roster to draft capital, free agency, money to spend, etc. And then kind of put together, all right, how would you rank these teams? If you could take over these franchises today, which one? Obviously we would all like to take over the Packers, I think, just because it's the Packers. But if you didn't have any affiliation with any of those four teams, which one would be the one just based on their current situation? would be the one that you'd want to take over. So we talked about it yesterday in great detail. The Packers have 5 really core players, on their roster: Christian Watson, Elton Jenkins, Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, and Jair Alexander. If you missed why those are the 5 core players, definitely listen to yesterday's YouTube video. But those are the 5, and then they've got a bunch of young players that are up and coming and talented, but you can't really count on them yet to be future stars or like the foundation of your roster. And then you've got a few wild cards like Jordan Love and Josh Myers and AJ Dillon, where you're just kind of like, all right, how good can these guys be? Are they something? Are they nothing? And you just don't know. But 5 core players on your roster, again: Watson, Jenkins, Clark, Gary, and Jair. So let's take a look at the core of the Chicago Bears roster. You've got some pretty talented players 25 and under. Jaquan Brisker, their second-round pick from last year. Justin Fields is only 23. Brisker's 23, by the way. Kyler Gordon, the corner, 23. Braxton Jones, who had a really nice year at tackle last year. They found a starting tackle in the draft in Braxton Jones. He's going to be a good one, 23 years old. Jalen Johnson, the corner, only 23 years old. Chase Claypool, your mileage may vary as to just how much of a core player he is, but he's 24. Khalil Herbert, kind of same thing, 24. And then Darnell Mooney is 25. So a decent base there. But if you're talking about like, all right, who can I count on to maybe play at like a Pro Bowl? And when I say Pro Bowl level today, I'm not talking like your Tyler Huntley Pro Bowl alternate, like 7th down the list. I'm talking like a legitimate, like top 3 player in the conference at your given position, right? Which ones are you saying like, yeah, I feel really confident they can be that player or become that player? There's probably 2, maybe, in like, not necessarily right away, but like Justin Fields is at least in the conversation of like, if he can start putting some things together as a pocket passer just a little bit more, you're talking about him potentially in the conversation maybe down the line. I'm not saying necessarily right now. And then Jalen Johnson, definitely really good corner. He could definitely get in that conversation as well. But you're lacking that top end talent in Chicago. If we want to go the old fashioned, like, all right, who is my offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator losing sleep over when you're facing the Chicago Bears? Probably Justin Fields. Like, Justin Fields is probably that only guy right now where you got to make sure he doesn't beat you with his feet. And there's just so many different things he can bring to the table. Great deep ball, good arm, like great arm. Obviously insane athletic ability. So like he's the one guy I'm kind of losing some sleep over. Everyone else, some nice players, but I'm okay. I'm not super stressed yet, right? So let's then go to the Detroit Lions. They've got Jameson Williams, the wide receiver, who's still only 21 years old. Aiden Hutchinson, only 22. Kirby Joseph, who almost picked off Aaron Rodgers 3 times in one game, 22. Penei Sewell, only 22. Malcolm Rodriguez, the inside linebacker that they found, I think in the 6th round, maybe 5th or 6th round, 23 years old. Amon-Ra St. Brown, still only 23. DeAndre Swift, 24. Frank Ragnow is still only 26. And then Jared Goff at 28. Again, your mileage may vary as well on what you think of Jared Goff, but they have a pretty impressive young core. And if you want to talk about, again, high-end talent, Aiden Hutchinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Frank Ragnow, Penei Sewell, that is a good core 4 to build around for that team, and they're going to have some draft capital to build on it even more. More on that in just a moment. So that's Detroit's side of things. If you look at Minnesota, it's a little bit more bleak. Now, they have Christian Darrisaw, who is a phenomenal left tackle and continues to develop. He's going to be a very good player for a very long time. And then Justin Jefferson, one of the best players in the league, probably the best player in the division, I would say. Like, I think he's probably the best player in the division. So those 2 players are a really good starting point for any franchise, a franchise left tackle. And anytime you have the best player in the division, that's clearly a good thing. But then you've got Ezra Cleveland, TJ Hawkinson, Brian O'Neill is 27. Dalvin Cook is 27. If you're looking at like 25 and under, it's Darrisaw, Jefferson, Ezra, and Hawkinson. And like that's good. Like that's a solid 4, especially when you consider Darrisaw and Jefferson. But it starts getting pretty old after that. And you don't have, like, the top end talent is basically Jefferson and Darrisaw. Now, you could argue Brian O'Neill at right tackle, who's 27, Dalvin Cook, who's a really good running back at 27. You could put those 2 in that group as well. But your young core is kind of starting with Jefferson and Darrisaw and kind of ending there when it comes to top end players. So that's where we're at for like the cores of these rosters. Now, if you want to look at it from maybe the most important standpoint sometimes, that's the quarterback, right? In Green Bay, you've got this weird Rodgers-Love dynamic right now. Is Aaron going to be back? Even if he's back, it's 1, maybe 2 years, probably at most. And you've got Jordan Love. Do you pick up his 5th-year option? Is he any good? Is he bad? Is it like, what do you have in him? So they're in this really interesting position at quarterback. The Lions have Jared Goff, and Jared Goff was, I don't even know if it's sneaky. Like, he was good maybe really good last year. Like, he had a very nice season. Now, some really nice weapons around him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a really good running attack. That offensive line played well. Then they go out and get some guys like DJ Chark, but like, it's not like we're talking about this as this loaded Detroit Lions offensive roster. They're good, no question about it, but Jared Goff point guarded that offense, and I wouldn't even say he was just game managing. He was good. He was a good quarterback. So that's an interesting one. Like I said earlier, the big question in Detroit moving forward is going to be how far can Jared Goff, Jared Goff quarterbacked the team to the Super Bowl. It's easy to forget that, but he legitimately quarterbacked the team to the Super Bowl. And, they didn't win it, but that's not nothing. And this is a really good young Lions team. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens with Jared Goff moving forward and how he follows up on what was a really nice 2022 season. The Chicago Bears have Justin Fields at quarterback now. They also have the #1 pick in the draft. So if they wanted to go in a different direction, they could. All indications seem to be that they're going to stick with Justin Fields. You never know. I do think they're going to go Fields and trade the #1 pick for just a treasure chest of stuff. But, even still, Justin Fields is not a bad starting spot and is already maybe the most talented quarterback in Chicago Bears history. He's at least in the conversation. So that's not a bad spot to be in. And then Minnesota, Kirk Cousins, 34 years old, massive contract, is probably only ever going to get you so far from a playoff standpoint. Nice season last year. He played at a very high level for the majority of last year. You give him weapons, he can be pretty darn good. If you get pressure on him or he has to improv and do a bunch of things, that's not going to be his game. But you can win with Kirk Cousins. You just have to have the right roster around him. Unfortunately for Minnesota, it seems like that roster is probably going to decline rather than add additional talent around him moving forward. So those are the quarterback situations for each of the teams. Now we look at the salary cap. What opportunity do you have to go out and spend in free agency? The Chicago Bears have $98.6 million in salary cap space as we speak. Insane. Almost $100 million in cap space. Now, if you're a Packer fan, which you probably are because you're here, if there was ever a time for a team to have $100 million in salary cap space, this is probably it, because this is not a strong free agent class. But you have to remember, Chicago can take on salary from other teams. They can go out and trade draft picks for some high-end players. It doesn't have to be players that are free agents. They could go out and get a DeAndre Hopkins. They could go out and do a variety of different things to use that money and go get some really, really phenomenal football players. So it doesn't have to just be via free agency. And even though we look at this free agent class right now and go, it's not that great, there are going to be a lot of players probably that end up being released, before the start of the league year or right after, before the start of free agency. And again, Chicago's going to have just a insane amount of money to go out and spend on those players as well. And if Chicago is smart, because they're probably not competing for a Super Bowl this year, that would be a pretty impressive story to go from worst team in the league to best team in the league. But if they're smart, they would front load a bunch of those contracts so that in a couple years, maybe you've got a couple high-end players that are playing at extremely low salaries, and that really opens you up for some fun opportunities. But again, if you're a Packer fan, maybe you're hoping they don't do that, but they're going to have a lot of opportunity to go out and spend a ton of money. The Lions find themselves at $15.8 million under the salary cap, so they can go out and spend some money. Again, they'll probably open some things up from some restructures as well to have even more than that. The Packers currently sit at negative $17.5 million, and the Vikings currently sit at negative $21.2 million. So you've kind of got this, the Packers and Vikings have been here, and they're sort of on the decline and fighting some salary cap situations. And the Bears and Lions have kind of been here, but they're kind of trending up and have a lot of salary cap space and some good draft capital that they're going to be able to build those two teams up. Speaking of draft capital, you look at all four of these teams. The Bears have the #1 pick in the draft. They have the Ravens 2nd, a 3rd, a 4th, the Eagles 4th, a 5th, the Ravens 5th, and a 7th. Now, overall, take the first pick away, right? A 1, a 2, a 3, 2 4s, 2 5s, and a 7 is not that spectacular of a overall draft class, right? You have ultimately 3 picks in the top 100 right now, a 1st, a 2nd, and a 3rd. So it's like they just on paper, like if you look at a first, a second, a third, a fourth, or 2/4, 2/5, and a seventh, like it's okay, but that's a pretty standard draft class. However, when you have the number 1 overall pick and you're going to be trading down, who knows what that could become? That could end up being 3 first-round picks plus first-round picks in the future, some high-end players. So they are going to be able to cash in that number 1 pick for a ton of stuff, assuming that they do not go with a quarterback and trade Justin Fields instead. That is going to be a money spot. There are multiple quarterbacks who could be in the conversation for number 1 overall. It's going to be in the eye of the beholder. And you might be thinking, well, Andy, if all of those young quarterbacks are in the draft, maybe the number 1 isn't worth it. No, some team's always going to fall in love with their guy and want to go get their guy. That will have a ton of value, and Chicago is going to be able to not only go out and spend $100 million in free agency, but make a ton of profit off of that number 1 pick in incoming stuff. And if they do things right, and like the Bears had kind of a sneaky nice draft last year, and they did Green Bay a favor by trading for Chase Claypool. That would have been the 32nd pick in the draft, basically another first that they just spent on Chase Claypool, which is a really bad decision. But overall, they had a nice draft last year. And this is a team, like they found Jack Sanborn in undrafted free agency. They're kind of trending in the right direction. So they're going to have the opportunity to go out and really use that number 1 pick to gain a bunch of stuff. The Lions, meanwhile, have the number 6 pick, the number 18 pick, a second, the Vikings second, a third, a fifth, Denver 6th, and their own 6th. So they have a lot of draft capital as well. They're going to have, 5 picks in the top 100, including the 6th overall pick. They could trade that back to 12, 13, 15, 16, somewhere in there, and end up with maybe even more picks. Like, this is a team that could do some serious damage. Or they could package picks up and go and get a top 3 player in this draft potentially. They also could stick where they're at. And if they, if the first 3 picks end up being quarterbacks, like they could end up with the 3rd best positional player in this draft. Or maybe they go up and get, the number 4 guy. What if they end up with Carter or Will Anderson in one of those 2 guys to pair with Aiden Hutchinson up front? That could be a nightmare. So this is a Lions team that is set up really well from a draft status standpoint. Again, 5 top 100 picks, including the 6th, the 18th, and 2 second rounders. Like I said, they're a team that has the ability to do some serious damage in the draft and really help themselves a little bit in free agency as well. And they're already a team that's trending in the right direction. Vikings have the 23rd overall pick, no second round pick. They have a 3rd, the Lions 4th, a 5th, and likely a 5th round compensation pick. So not a ton. Again, if you're looking at these teams and like weighing what they have in assets and things like that, this Vikings team, most negative 21.2 million over the salary cap, I should say. They have the worst salary cap situation of the 4 teams, and they have the worst draft capital of the 4 teams. So again, if you're looking for a team that's probably going to decline, probably isn't going to be as lucky for a team that got pretty darn lucky with their point differential a season ago. Like if you're looking if you own the Vikings from a stock standpoint, you're being like sell right now. Like this is a team that's probably trending in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Green Bay, they at least have the 15th pick in the draft. Not a top 10 pick, but that's a really sound pick for Green Bay. They have a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a comp 5, and they could potentially end up with 5 7th round picks, depending on if they do get those 2 7th round picks with the compensatory formula. So they're swimming in 7th round picks. Do with that what you will. But they still have, again, the number 15 overall, but then, 3 top 100 picks at the end of the day. It's not a ton, and you're not talking like Bears number 1 overall pick, the Lions with 5 top 100s, including a number 6 and a number 18. So the team that finished ahead of them, the Lions, all right, you just look at Packers-Lions, all right? The Lions finished ahead of Green Bay. Green Bay's in this weird offseason of what are they going to do? Are they going to sell off some of this team? Is Aaron going to be back? Is it going to be a Jordan Love transition? So that's a big question mark. Meanwhile, Detroit has 33 million more in cap space right now than Green Bay does, and they have better draft picks. So it's not to say Green Bay can't be better than Detroit next year. I'm not saying that at all, but Detroit has a lot of inherent advantages right now, especially when they were a game better and beat Green Bay twice a season ago. So that's where we're at from a draft standpoint. Some key free agents this offseason in the NFC North. Dalvin Tomlinson for the Vikings. That is going to be a key free agent for them. They could potentially lose him. The Bears have David Montgomery. They have Herbert. Not a huge deal. Lions have DJ Chark and Jamal Williams. And the Packers, probably Alan Lazard, Keyshawn Nixon at this point, probably your top two, with Yash as a restricted free agent. So those, not like a ton, right? Tomlinson for the Vikings. Again, if you're looking at a player who could be gone, that would probably make the biggest impact in free agency, probably Dalvin Tomlinson for the Vikings. So again, Vikings trending in the wrong direction in almost every single one of these categories. So look at the Vikings. They finished first, right? They're over the salary cap. They have the worst draft capital. You've got two core players that are really good in Jefferson and Darisaw, and you've got an aging Kirk Cousins. For the Lions, who finished second last year, you've got some salary cap space to play with. Picks 6 and 18, 2 seconds, a third, 5 top 100 picks. You've got Aiden Hutchinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Frank Ragnow, Penei Sewell, also playing at an extremely high level. And you got a 28-year-old Jared Goff, which that's the big question mark for Detroit, is how far can he take you? The Packers, they finished third in the division. You've got the Rodgers-Love dynamic, a pretty solid core with some high-end players, but no cap space, average draft capital, and the best, like the biggest opportunity to improve this team is really with the 15th overall pick. And then the Bears, fourth in the division, no real high-end players. You've got Fields and Jalen Johnson as your top two. You've got $100 million cap space, though, and the number 1 overall pick, which is going to bring you a bounty of stuff this offseason. So how would you rank these teams, 1 through 4? If you had to become the GM of one of these 4 teams, all 4 openings are there, and you don't have a preference. You like all 4 teams. You don't have a bias against any of them or for any of them. I think I put, like, the Lions are really interesting. They have a good young team. They have some really nice core players in Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jared Goff, I like I said, he had a nice year. I'm not sure how far he can take you. And I think if you look at this team, like, you know, Aiden Hutchinson's a nice player. They've got some really nice players, but I still wonder, like, you start looking at, like, the Eagles and the 49ers and just how many high end, but, like, what if they go out and get a huge playmaker like the Eagles did in A.J. Brown? Or, like, man, this is a really interesting. And what if Jameson Williams, like, breaks out? He was phenomenal for Alabama. He's coming back from injury. If he breaks out in a major way, that's like him and Amon-Ra St. Brown together. Like, that could be really scary with DeAndre Swift in the backfield. Good offensive line. Like, this is an interesting team. I think I would have to put them first. The Bears, though, the Bears are a GM's wet dream. Like, they just are right now. You have a complete blank slate. You've got an interesting young quarterback that you can keep if you want, or you can go in a different direction because you have the number 1 overall pick. You have the number 1 overall pick, so that you can trade for a ton of stuff, and you have $100 million salary cap space. You've got some nice young players, like not anything that's like over the top. You don't have a really sound core, but like you get to build that team in your image. Now, this is sort of like the mystery box thing, the old Family Guy, like, why would I take the boat? The mystery box could be anything. It could even be a boat. Like, just because you have $100 million in salary cap space, and just because you have the number 1 overall pick in the draft and are going to get some stuff in return, you still have to capitalize on that. You still have to sign the right players. You still have to draft the right players, make the right trades, and more importantly, you have to build a culture. Like, you can go and sign free agents and draft players. If you don't build the right culture with the right players, the right coaches, it doesn't amount to anything. And this is a team right now that has had a bad culture, bad situation, that's going to have to overcome some of that stuff. But like I said, man, the Bears right now are a GM's just fever dream. Like, you get everything. You get to build the entire team in your image with all the salary cap space, nothing taken up with future salary cap hits. Number 1 pick in the draft, like, just go have fun at that point. Like, if you're starting a franchise in Madden, that is like the greatest thing ever, right? So they're in a really fun spot if you're not a Packer fan, right? Packers, you've got a lottery ticket at quarterback, a solid core with Watson, Gary, Jair as 25 and under players, Elton Jenkins, Kenny Clark, and you got the number 15 pick in the draft. It's going to take a little gymnastics. You're probably going to have to get better before you get worse, but I still think they're in a better spot than Minnesota. Minnesota, even though they finished first last year, they end up in a 13-4 record, a really, not a good point differential on the season. They lose in the first round. They get no playoff win. They do have Darisaw and Jefferson, which is not a bad place to start. Those are 2 high-end, high-caliber players. Jefferson, like I said, best player in the division. They're the most over the cap, and they have the worst draft capital. And they're going to have to, they may lose Dalvin Tomlinson, and they're going to have to purge some players from that roster. So I think Lions, Bears, like you could argue either direction. I'd put the Packers a tier below them, and then the Vikings at the bottom right now, if you're looking at sort of the state of the NFC North and these teams moving forward. It's an interesting discussion, and I think you could hear arguments for certainly any of these teams. I'm sure Vikings fans are saying like, hey, we finished first last year. Can we get a little bit more credit? And I'm sure Packer fans are saying like, hey, yeah, we had a down year, but like this is a team that has no down years almost ever, and is always finds ways to bounce back and win. Maybe Jordan Love is the next big thing. Who knows, right? So you can make an argument there. And like I said, Lions and Bears have very strong arguments to make at this point. So if I complete blind taste test, all right, full transparency, blind taste test, if I didn't know which team was which, and I just looked at all four situations, I'm taking the Bears situation a million times out of a million. Let me build the team in my image with that free agent space, some nice players on the roster now, and all number one pick in the draft, which is going to get you a ton of stuff. Yeah, that's the situation I would probably want. We'll see what it actually amounts to, though, and if any of these teams have any right to even, compete in a Super Bowl conversation in the next 3, 4, or 5 years, that's a totally different story. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.